Hi, I'm Jason Nichols, and I'm on the left.
And I'm Vince Colonnese, and I'm on the right. And if we can't find common ground in this world today,
then we're all just travelers.
Passing each other in an international airport.
In this great American experiment,
we'll be relegated to the trash bin of history.
So let's come together.
To debate without yelling. And let's save this nation.
Deputy Opinion Editor at Newsweek, Batya Ungar-Sargon, next on Vince and Jason Save the Nation. Vince and Jason Save the Nation is brought to you by Goldco.
To all of our listeners with an IRA, a 401k, or other retirement savings, have you seen the headlines today? Our federal debt has now reached over $30 trillion. What the federal government is not saying is that the Fed is running out of ways to fight our growing debt bomb. Inflation and tax hikes may be their only way out. We all dodged a bullet when Senator Joe Manchin announced that he wouldn't support the Democrats' crazy Build Back Better plan. But the truth is, the Democrats may not give up so easily. That is not good news for hardworking American taxpayers. Whatever the Democrats do in 2022 may mean even more and higher inflation. The more the dollar comes under attack, the more physical gold and silver could protect your money. So if you have over $50,000 or more in your retirement savings, your money could be at risk. Learn how you can protect your life savings with physical gold and silver. Call 855-948-1605 to receive your wealth protection kit. That's right, call 855-948-1605. And Goldco may give you $10,000 or more in free silver when you open a qualified account. That's why Goldco is the only company we recommend for gold and silver. Goldco is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, a 5-time Inc. winner, and has countless 5-star reviews. So, what are you waiting for? Call 855-948-1605. That's 855-948-1605. Call Goldco and get started today.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Vince and Jason Save the Nation. I'm Jason Nichols. That is, again, fake Matthew McConaughey with me today. Vince is out. So we have got Bradley Cooper doing his fake working class guy mustache on. But never mind about him. We have a really, really compelling guest today. I'm really interested and excited to talk to her. Batya Ungar-Sargon. I hope I said your name correctly, Batya.
You said it perfectly, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And let me tell you, I just had to say this to Richie. You know, I am a sucker for being charmed. I can definitely be charmed. It's my weakness as a journalist. And Batya has already charmed me. So, you know, I already put my strap away, you know, so you're going to have to, because I was kind of ready, you know. All
right, so I'll be the one.
All the woke talk and all that. I was like, all right, I'm ready to take it to her. But, you know, because and let me just say this, as a person on the Daily Caller or Daily Caller sponsored podcast, I don't get a lot of love. So when I get some, you know what I mean? It definitely can charm me.
Those comment sections are not nice to Jason. That much I can definitely.
Yeah, I don't read the comments, but
right. So Jason gets it from the left, who can't stand when lefties engage with the right, and then he gets it from the right because he's on the left. So Jason, you're the hero here, and yeah. I just want to say, you know, I'm kind of like, at this point, I love debate. And I think, honestly, this show, what you guys are doing here, it's God's work. Like, this is the stuff that built our nation and that's going to save our nation. But also, like, just from a personal level, it's like, I'm so sick of talking to people I agree with. So all of which is just to say, bring it on, man. Like, I you know what I mean? Like, no hold barred, don't hold back. Like, that's the whole point of this show. And I'm so down with it. And also so glad to be here.
Well, as long as you don't log out after 8 minutes, like one of our political guests did. I won't say.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
They couldn't take the heat, and we weren't even really
30.
And they really weren't. We really weren't. Like, the interesting thing about our show is that we are not mean to people. Yeah. Like, we don't.
Except me. You guys are mean to me.
Yeah, we're mean to you, but we're mean to you. But everyone else, you know, we are very respectful. And, you know, I don't know, some people just don't like being disagreed with. And, you know, that's the way it works out. So I'm really glad that you are open to that. And I actually recently read one of your opinion pieces. And even where I disagree with you, I can definitely say that there's a reason that you are a deputy editor at Newsweek, and I will be sending you pieces from now on. Yes, good. You know, so I read this opinion piece where you stated that the left doesn't understand that marriage is an economic issue and it's not just a culture war issue. Now, is that a correct summary of what your piece said? And can you just like go in and explain that?
Yeah, totally. I think so much of what we call culture war issues are actually about class. So for example, let's take the parental rights and education bill out of Florida, right? That looks like it's about culture war issues, LGBTQ rights, but actually it's about public school parents, right, who tend to be middle class and working class parents, who tend to have, you know, working class people, middle class people who haven't gone to fancy universities tend to still believe things like, oh, I don't know, there's a difference between men and women, or that we should all strive to live in a colorblind society, right? These are sort of commonsensical views that are very prevalent in the working class and increasingly alien to the elites. And so you take an issue like the parental rights and education bill, the leftist elites try to tell you this is a culture war issue, right? They're trying to penalize being gay, when the truth of the matter is that it's a class issue. It's about parents, working class, middle class parents wanting to have some level of autonomy, some level of say over their child's education. And I think there's so many issues that are like that, but marriage is another one where the left tells us like, oh, it's this antiquated, you know, institution that, you know, is bad for women. It's bad for gay people, right? It's this kind of, they turn it into this culture war battle, but actually being married gives you a huge economic benefit. So I'll just give you one statistic, which is that the median income for a Black man in America who's not married is $35,000 a year. The median income for a Black man in America who is married is $90,000 a year, which is actually $40,000 a year more than the median income of a white male in America. So I'm just trying to say, like, there's like an economic and class component to marriage, to a lot of the things that we consider to be culture war issues, that it is very much in the benefit of the liberal elites to erase that class component and make it sound like it's about culture.
So again, one of the things that you do acknowledge in your piece is that causation is not correlation. Totally. You know, that a lot of times, and again, if you know William Julius Wilson's work about the marriageable male index and about the types of men who get married, particularly within certain communities, are usually people who are high earners anyway. But I will say this, isn't it the left that fought for the expansion of marriage rights? So wouldn't that be them fighting for those economic rights for more people? So I understand what you're saying about marriage being beneficial economically. I agree with that. I know you were saying, you know, I think your argument in other pieces that you've written seems to be against the move towards, so I don't want to state this incorrectly, but it sounds like you believe, and I think most people would agree with you, and I would agree with you, that you should be able to take care of a family on one income. But it's, you know, financially, it's going to help you if you have two incomes, you know?
Yeah, don't tell my girlfriend that.
Hey, you know, I mean, I was pretty proud. We made it for a while on one income, but we lived a very, you know, different lifestyle on one income. But point being, how is the left ignoring this? And particularly when we're talking about the expansion of marriage rights, I'll just include the fact that LGBT people of color, since you wanted to bring race into it, LGBT people of color are more likely to be poor than whites and heterosexual people of color. So expanding those marriage rights wouldn't that be a recognition of the value of the institution broadly and of its economic value?
Yeah, and remember, there was a divide within the LGBT community around the issue of marriage equality, because you had a lot of gay people pushing for the right to get married, and then a lot of gay people being like, the whole purpose of what we represent is to be sort of orthogonal to marriage, to be like, no, like those institutions don't matter. Of course, expanding equal protections to all Americans is important. And yes, I totally agree that has been traditionally associated with the left. For decades, the left represented civil rights, gay rights, police reform, right? Ending mass incarceration, like a lot of things that are extremely objectively important things. The values this nation was founded on for many decades, for centuries, the left represented the expansion of those rights in a really important way. What happened is they won all the battles, okay? They won the battle for marriage equality. They won the battle on racism, right? They won the battles. Now there is no longer a partisan divide about whether racism is bad, right? There's no longer a partisan divide about marriage equality. Really, 60% of Republicans support marriage equality, okay? That's as near as a consensus as you can hope for. And it's astonishing in 15 years what they achieved. There's no longer a partisan divide about the civil rights issues. Those battles have been won. What they're doing now is they are moving the goalpost to a place where it's just completely niche and marginal. So I totally agree with you. Expanding those rights were really important. I will say, so to the single income point, Elizabeth Warren, wrote a book called The Two Income Trap. It's the most amazing book. Tucker Carlson has cited that book as one of the best books he's ever read. That book is deeply conservative. And but I think it's
she was
totally
a Republican
correct.
until 1996.
She was a Republican. I think she was totally right. I think the left position should be to get women out of the workforce. Like that should be the left position, because the American dream was that you can raise a family on a single income and you can have upward mobility for your kids. We have lost that in the name of feminism. Now, of course, I'm a feminist. I have a job. I'm very happy with my job. I would be miserable as a stay-at-home mom. But we have taken away the choice, which was supposed to be the feminist ideal and the feminist dream. And we have made it impossible. Because of that sort of getting women into the workforce, we've made it impossible for a man to support his family, which to me, that again, like culture and class, they're so intertwined. And I think that's the decimation of the American working class that we've seen over the last 40 years. And both sides are totally responsible for that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with a lot of what you said. That where we have an issue, and I think we have a disagreement and I think honestly, it's kind of weird because I think you're giving the left way too much credit. The idea that they won all the battles, is.
I mean, Jason, can we at least say that if you look at the
police reform, like you mentioned, police reform, we haven't won that battle.
We
haven't won the battle. Even on mass incarceration, we haven't won that battle.
So let me defend those positions. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Racism, I don't think we've won.
Yeah, great.
Certainly, you and I, of course, are going to disagree on race and the importance of race and racism. I think we have a different idea of the construction of racism. I think you think of it from an individual perspective, which is one form of racism. And I think of it from an institutional and systemic situation where things from the past can actually affect the future, like redlining and things like that.
I totally agree with that. Okay. Sorry, finish. I don't want to interrupt you.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, all right.
We're interviewing you.
Okay. I totally agree. I think that there are 4 remaining areas where the American government is still involved in state-sponsored racism, but it's only against Blacks. So this is my problem with the way the left thinks about race. They've overgeneralized the problem. So America is not a white supremacy anymore. You can be not white, you could be Jewish, you could be Asian, you could be Hispanic. There are many non-white people that America guarantees the American dream to today. Not guarantees, but has no state-sponsored.
Statistics show like Indians, or
Indians are doing better. Nigerian
better
Americans are earning more than white Americans.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into that.
Okay,
but anyway, go ahead.
So my point is that
the Nigerian Americans, Jason gets very
there's a specific community that we have historically denied equal protections before the law and continue to because of state-sponsored reasons, deprive equal access to the American dream. I think there's 4 remaining areas. I would say it's police brutality, right? That's been shown, and mass incarceration. Public schooling is segregated by race, essentially, especially in the North, especially in liberal cities. And then intergenerational poverty among 20 to 30% of Americans descended from slaves. Those problems are not issues with like racism writ large. They're specific problems with how America treats Blacks descended from slaves. It is a moral emergency. Okay, this is a moral emergency. But what the left has done is it has expanded the problem of racism to include things that are totally unrelated, like, wanting to limit immigration. Suddenly that's racist. That is actually at odds with the needs of the Black community. Now, I will say also, furthermore, so that's on the question of like, I agree with you that there are certain places where racism is not individual, but it is still state sponsored. And we have to actually take care of those issues like very, very urgently. But I think that at the same time, in terms of like where we're going as a nation, right? We haven't won the battle against police brutality, but the last bill that was put forward to address police brutality was put forward by a Republican, Senator Tim Scott, and it was filibustered by the Democrats, okay? To me, when you have both sides wanting to address something, and the thing that's getting in the way of addressing that is a political fight, you cannot even compare that to 10 years ago when Republicans absolutely refused to admit that police brutality was a problem. Mass incarceration, President Trump released 5,000 Black men from prison. States like Georgia and Idaho have been overseeing mass releases of prisoners over the last 10 years. It's been Republican states that have been at the forefront of ending mass incarceration, while Chuck Schumer is protecting the private prisons in, northern New York. So to me, that is what winning the cultural battle looks like. We haven't won the issue yet. These issues still remain. We still have to fight for them. But the entire country is now united in the view that these are problems. That's what I mean about the left having won those battles. Like, yeah, we're still fighting for that equality. It's not there yet, but both sides at this point want it. That is a cultural battle that the left won, and won very recently.
So I think when it comes to police reform, number one, when we look at why that Tim Scott bill sank, was that he didn't come to the table being very honest about qualified immunity, which again, qualified immunity, for people who don't understand what that is essentially saying that if a police officer commits some sort of crime in the, within doing their duties, that they are absolved from civil suits. And I think, of course, here in the state of Maryland, where I'm from, we have, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which, by the way, they can shoot somebody and not have to give a statement for a week. Like, that's absurd. You know what I mean? Like, there's under no circumstances, Batya, if you shot somebody, would they say, okay, we're going to wait a week so you can get your story together?
Right, exactly.
And then, so there are these kinds of things. And Republicans have been people who have supported a lot of this, a lot of these things, and a lot of what Tim Scott was doing was just kind of window dressing and trying to say, hey, I'm for this, but I'm not actually going to have any teeth in it. I agree, and just on the policing front, I'll tell you one thing that I actually disagree with a lot of the left-wing orthodoxy is the banning of chokeholds. I actually think that that's not always...
Did not see that coming.
Yeah, no. And the reason I say that is, Richie and I have both done martial arts, and chokes are a lot of times safer than strikes. So when you have people on the ground and you're striking them, you can kill somebody that way. That's what people don't realize.
Having been stricken by a cop with a billy club, I would have preferred the choke.
Yeah, like, again, you can choke someone to death. And that's, again, I will also say that they should be used only when, like, there are no other options, because number one, when you're choking somebody, what you have to recognize is that it is physically impossible to not resist being choked. You know what I mean? So you can't choke somebody and say, stop resisting, because when you are losing air, you will fight it. The thing about drowning, like that's why people tie weights to their ankles, because you physically cannot.
I just had a flashback to like 15 years old and my brother putting me in a chokehold, outweighing me by like 50 pounds.
Yeah,
this is even so dark.
Yeah, all right, but anyway, the chokehold thing.
Can we brighten it up though? Because Jason, I just want, like, I think you guys are basically in agreement on a lot of things here. Obviously, there's progress to be made, but I think kind of what Batya is getting at is the framing of the arguments in our discourse today, which is like basically the left wants to focus on these facts like race, when actually things like economy are actually much more relevant to, you know, the problem at hand.
And like, again, but see, here's my issue with that. When we ignore
you don't have to ignore it. You don't have to ignore it. It's just, it doesn't have to be
but there
every
are
every cable news show, you know?
Yeah, no, but there are certain issues where class doesn't even necessarily enter into it. For example, you know, the National Academy of Medicine. I know this because I oftentimes use this as an example in my classes. Now, they did a report and it says minority persons are less likely than white persons to be given appropriate cardiac care, receive kidney dialysis or transplants, or receive the best treatments for stroke, cancer, and AIDS. But it goes on to say, racial and ethnic minorities receive lower quality health care than white people, even when insurance status, income, age, and severity of the conditions are comparable. So again, this goes beyond, you know, police brutality, which I think is a big issue, but you are much more likely to have a heart attack in your life, probably, than getting beaten up by a cop. And I'll just say that.
That's for sure.
You are much more likely to need care from a physician. There are beliefs, you know, there have been studies that have shown that many medical professionals believe Black people don't experience pain the same way as white people and have less sensitive nerve endings. You know, these are things that, and it doesn't matter if you're a rich Black person or a poor Black person. We saw with our maternal death issues with Black women, and with all the people, by the way, all the people who are pro-life out there, only thing that I'll say is I believe your sincerity, but where, for example, with Mississippi and what's going on with Mississippi right now, Mississippi leads the nation in infant mortality. Where is the work, if you're pro-life, to save the lives of the babies? I mean, they are literally on the same level as Mexico when it comes to infant mortality. And guess who the majority of that is? Now, again, I'm sure there's a class element to that, but when you look at—
So wait, Jason, let me just ask you.
But wait, let me just say this one last thing. I got you.
Interchanging minority and Black, and so I want to know, in that study, you kind of jumbled the two. Batya did acknowledge the fact that Black Americans are kind of should be, you know, treated as, based on what happened historically, should be treated completely separately, and that actually what you just did was kind of muddy the waters between Black Americans and minorities. So is that specifically that study?
Sure, but let me just say this one last thing. No, I hear you. But let me just say, you know, you guys remember the case with Serena Williams, where she almost died during childbirth?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or right after childbirth? Yeah. You're not gonna find a wealthier, more famous person than Serena Williams. But even she couldn't get quality care. You know, and Richie and I are saying this as people who have, you know, healthcare professionals in our families and all that. And she couldn't get quality care. So my whole thing is—
I get my stitches on the kitchen table.
Yes, class. You know, you were lucky you got stitches. My family would be like, man, rub some.
No, I get staples if there are no stitches left. I get staples.
But the whole point is, like, to just boil it down to class does a disservice when, even with the quality air, you know, you can look at the EPA and some of their studies, the quality air that Black people on average breathe. They said, I think it was a report that I read that said that Black people who make $200,000 breathe the same quality air as a white person who makes $25,000 a year. Like, so again, when we just, I think class, of course, the intersection of race and class are important, you know, when we're going to talk about these things. And class is absolutely important. One of the things that, you know, when I debated Tucker, I would always say, like, your viewer out there that's writing me an email, calling me the N-word, has more in common with me, you know what I mean, than they do with you, you know, in terms of the lifestyle they live and, you know, the fact that they have to look at their finances every month and make sure that they're not in the red and, you know, pay their credit cards down. All of those things that Tucker Carlson doesn't have to worry about. Shout out to Tucker, that's my man. But, you know, that person who thinks they have, and this is how race functions, that person thinks they have more in common with Tucker when they have more in common with me.
But aren't you, you're kind of proving Batya's point.
Right, I'm acknowledging it. That's my point, I'm acknowledging.
Which is like the right and the left, the framework of the conversation, because the left basically, I think, kind of dictates where the discourse goes, and the left and the right is inherently reactionary. So the right's saying, oh, CRT, and they're going crazy, and they're falling right into that trap of jumping into that framework of everything. I don't think Batya is saying that economy or you know, economic situations are the sole thing that we should boil it down to, but it's a more important metric than it gets time in our discourse. Is that fair, Batya?
Yeah. I mean, you know, like I said, I think that we still are depriving Black Americans of a fair shot at the American dream in many ways. But I think a lot of those ways today are equally shared between left and right, whereas the acknowledgement that we need to do a better job of doing that is also now shared between left and right at this point. Overall, I mean, obviously there's still racists on both sides, but overall. And so once we have that acknowledgement, what is getting in the way of that? You know, how do we solve those problems? How do we approach those problems? The approach to those problems is going to look very different when you have a multiracial coalition acknowledging the problem than when you just have one side saying, hey, how come these people are not being given a fair shot? But I think we were mostly agreeing. I mean, Richie, I'm curious, do you disagree with anything that we're saying?
Well, so interestingly, I mean, I'm filling in for Vince. I would say I fall like all over the spectrum. I mean, I literally moved to DC and was knocking on doors.
Yeah, I told your girlfriend that too. And,
but
no, I'm kidding.
But I do think, first off, like what you mentioned previously about the institution of marriage and the way that we have conversations about that, I think, you know, where I really depart from the modern left, and I was thinking about kind of the experience that my mom had moving to Washington, D.C. in the late 60s, early 70s. And I talk to her about this all the time, which is you guys were fighting for those things. And, you know, how do you feel about where things have gone now? Because she says basically, like, I was a feminist and now we can't even, like, it's not even that we can't be as female as we want to be and be comfortable as that. It's we can't even identify what a female is anymore. She doesn't even know. My mom went on Tim Pool 2 weeks ago, and I mean, I'm glad she did it, because it was like every, you know, she was in a different world, in a different planet from the conversation that's happening, like on this kind of like woke cutting edge of like, and, you know, so we had to explain to her, like, intersectionality is pretty basic, but, you know, it goes way deeper down the rabbit hole from there. And, you know, my mom's like, what happened to, you know, just like a woman wanting to be a woman? So
yeah,
I'd be interested to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, like I was like there was this video the other day of like these women dressed up in the Handmaid's Tale costumes, protesting outside Judge Amy Coney Barrett's home.
ACB, yeah.
And I looked at that and I thought to myself, actually tweeted this, like, so Justice Amy Coney Barrett is literally the embodiment of the feminist dream. Like, she's got 7 kids, 2 of them adopted. She went to, you know, I think Christian school, small schools no one's heard of, now is a Supreme Court justice and is the smartest person in every room she's in, right? Like, what could a woman who literally didn't have to choose to leave anything out, which, by the way, I think makes a lot of women angry. Like, they're like, well, I thought I had to choose between having an amazing career and having a lot of children. No. So she's this feminist icon to me. I look at her and I think that is the dream. Like, I wish she had existed when I was little and I could have been like, no, you can have everything, instead of thinking you have to make choices. And you see these women protesting her, and you know that the women protesting her are the kind of women who say like, well, we don't know what a woman is, or trans women are women, or like a woman, you know, they would like, there's no such real difference, biological difference between men and women, right? Like, it's just so funny. How is this another instance of how the right is now going to take up the mantle of feminism and feminist iconry, and like saying you don't have to choose, you can have it all, while like the feminists on the left today have actually sort of turned against women in this interesting way. Yeah, what do you think?
So that's Batya, I actually saw that tweet where you called Amy Coney Barrett a feminist icon, and it gave me a little bit of a chuckle, because I know some of my colleagues and friends would literally have palpitations doing that. But I think it's fair to say that she has been somebody who has accomplished a whole lot and was able to have lots of kids and all of that. I don't know, what does her husband do?
I was just gonna say, like,
because I think that's a class thing. That's my argument, is there's a class thing. Most women.
I thought he was a stay-at-home dad.
Is he a stay-at-home dad? I mean, I
could
guess
be wrong about that,
right
but I was gonna say, like, the way he looks at her in this like worshipful way, like, that is the feminist dream, is to get some guy to look at you like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing for
he's a lawyer. He's a lawyer.
Oh, he's a lawyer. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Now it's starting to look a little different.
Fake news.
All right. Now she's not looking so feminist icon-y to me. But I hear that, but still, I think that's beautiful. I don't know that my wife would be with it, but like, I'd have 7 kids if I could. But I mean, I can, but I can't take care of 7 kids. But I think that's wonderful, but it's easier when your husband makes really good money and you are someone who's educated and makes really good money. You're not you're not in a field where, there are a lot of people who are educated like me who make middle class salaries, even though I'd say, based on the fact of my credentials and everything, that puts me in another class bracket, because I think class encompasses more than income.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So I would never go around like, I mean, I guess I say I'm a middle class, regular middle class guy.
I'm not sure if you're aware, he's a doctor. He has a monocle as well that he wears sometimes.
No, but I have a friend from South Carolina who's from a very, very poor Black family. And I remember one time he tweeted something like, that first 100,000 hits very different when you have a very, very large extended family that's also very poor, because all of those people are still counting on you to support them. And the minute you make that, like for some white kid who's making that money, who came from a middle class background, all that money is theirs. If you come from one of those families where there's just a lot of poverty, like most of that money, it's kind of like immigrants, right? Who send most of their money back home to Honduras or whatever. That money just hits different because there's a lot more people who have claims on it. So I think, again, coming back to the question of intergenerational poverty, and 20 to 30% of Americans descended from slavery, that is a real thing and a real burden on upward mobility, even for people who make it, into the next class.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's definitely a part of it. And I understand. I think, the point of the whole Handmaid's Tale thing was that it was kind of this dystopian story about the control of women's bodies, not necessarily about Amy Coney Barrett and her accomplishments and all that.
I think we're closer to 1984.
I want to say something that's going to get me in trouble, probably.
I probably shouldn't say this.
I shouldn't say this.
Hey, Logan, get ready to clip this.
I can't help. It is so beyond reasonable to think like, okay, let's take the Mississippi bill, right? 15 weeks, right? Limiting abortion to 15 weeks, which is literally where it's at for most developed nation democracies in Europe, right? Like totally reasonable. Or less, right? The idea that from there, that leads or is in any way comparable to sexual slavery or to being held down and raped while some surly infertile woman watches on enviously. There's something about that, about the cosplaying element that is so distant from reality that I really have to ask myself, like, and also, by the way, it's always white women at these things. You look at these protests, there's no Black women there. There's white women holding up signs that say, Black women need this, right? Like, it's all, there's something there that is like, I'm just asking myself, like, these are not the women who need abortions. They're not the women who are going to get abortions. This is nothing like sex slavery. Where is that like dystopian fantasy coming from that is so divorced from reality?
So let me just
element. You're right.
Let me
very smart point.
Let me play devil's advocate, aka white women's advocate. No, I'm kidding. Just joking. I want to keep my job, please.
The savior of the Karens.
Yeah, right. So when it comes to abortion rights, particularly with, I think it wasn't just the 15 weeks, which we know, again, just like, maintaining the Second Amendment, the whole argument is from real far right gun people is that it becomes a slippery slope. Once you start making gun control measures, all of a sudden you've fallen down on the path towards total disarmament. And I think what people are saying is that it's 15 weeks now, and then it'll be a 6-week heartbeat bill. And shout out to that guy. Remember that guy we interviewed who was like, those little babies, the guy from Texas? He was like, we got to save those little babies. And I was like,
it's weird to me too, by the way. That is weird to me too. I'm sorry. The attachment to the unborn. I'm sorry. It's like, it's weird to me that feminists think that feminism means I can literally kill something after it's been born. And it's weird to me that right wingers think that, because I'm religious, but I'm Jewish. And in Judaism, in the Talmud, life only begins after 40 days. For 40 days, God is still making up his mind whether he wants this thing to happen or not. So the first 40 days, it's considered like, just, they call it water, essentially. Like, I have an ancient tradition that I rely on that's like makes me pro-choice, basically. But there's when you say that the basis of your pro-choiceness is my body, my choice, there's nothing at the upper limit of that, right? So I feel like both sides are very weird about this. I just want to make a one quick point that I'm so curious what you both think about this.
Sure.
Okay, the data shows that 49% of Americans say they're pro-life and 49% of Americans say they're pro-choice. So that looks like a total polarity, right? Like 50-50 split, blah, blah, blah. If you drill down into the numbers, over 60% of pro-choice Americans only think it should be legal in the first trimester, meaning that Mississippi bill, 15 weeks. And if you look at the pro-life Americans, 75% think there should be exceptions for rape, incest, and the mother's health, which means that like the vast majority of Americans are basically in agreement about the kind of, legal, safe, and rare point of view, right? Like, so then what do we see now? We see the two parties. One party is saying, they're looking at the vast majority of Americans who are totally united on this issue, basically, more or less. And they're saying, so one party says, we're going to be the party that says you can abort it the day before it's due. And the other party that says, we're going to be the party that says, you're going to go to jail if you slip and fall and you miscarry after 6 weeks. It's like insane, but I feel like this is a perfect encapsulation of our entire political system. The vast majority of Americans are just not that divided on anything, really. We're so united about the most important things, and the parties are insane.
So let me just say, in terms of the 15 weeks. Number one, it's arbitrary. So it's an arbitrary date. It's not like when we're looking at viability, which is a scientific construction. You know what I mean?
Is Roe v. Wade, but
a
bunch of Supreme Court justices decide that in a court case, not doctors. Like Roe v. Wade, that number was determined by the Supreme Court.
Right, but I think medical professionals, from what I've read, say viability is a scientific cutoff, not like 15 weeks or these so-called heartbeat bills, which is 6 weeks. Which, by the way, they call it a fetal heartbeat when it's. And this is the thing I kept saying to the guy, but he was good. It's not a fetus until 8 weeks, so fetal heartbeat is wrong, and it doesn't have a heart, so it's not. a heartbeat. So it's not a fetal heartbeat, you know, but the guy was like, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but we got to save those little babies. But
Yeah.
he was really good though. But that guy was stuck to his guns. He was really smart. As far as, and I agree with you that we're not as far apart as a lot of us try to make it seem. And I think people have their own interest as to why that is. I don't know any, literally, and this kind of goes to your point. I don't know anyone who thinks that a baby, which is, I would say, you know, once a child can live, a fetus can live outside of the womb, it's a baby. Like, it's not, like, that's a baby. You can't terminate that. That's terminating a life.
Tell Ralph Northam.
I do. No, but that's bullshit. That's not what Ralph Northam was talking about. That's the stuff that Batya, I think, is talking about. No, but that.
But Jason, my question is
what was he
like,
talking about?
You know that's not true.
But my question is you never hear the pro-choice side saying we only mean it until this point. Like there's no internal limitation.
Yeah, exactly.
From the logic of their position. If their position is a woman should get to choose, we trust the women, right? Tell me until when, and they never will. They won't put an upper boundary on it. That's my question to them is like, how do you, where are you, you're going to say we don't say we trust women not to steal and therefore there's going to be no law against theft when women do it, right? Because it's like, yeah, we trust most women not to steal.
I believe all women. I believe every woman. All right.
No, well, I think again, maybe we're talking to different people because I always hear viability. Like that's the thing. I mean, and I would say, you know, getting back to something you said a little earlier when you were talking about, you know, these white women who like to do the cosplay and dress up like the handmaids and go in front of judges' homes.
R.I.P. my career for having said that.
No, listen. You know, I think Bill Burr and others, they've survived these kinds of critiques. So I think you're going to be all right. And I will have your back.
Our audience doesn't mind.
The reason that I will disagree is that you were saying like it doesn't affect these kind of middle and upper class white women. But when we look at the topic that you brought up, which is rape and incest, that doesn't have a class on it. You know, particularly, I and when I look at my students, who when they walk into a classroom, I have to, you know, I look at all the women in the class and realize that 1 out of every 4 of them is probably going to be the victim of some sort of sexual assault before they graduate. So those are middle-class kids for the most part. You know what I mean? And so
you're right.
One of the things about rape, you know, if God forbid one of them were to be, you know, to become pregnant, you know, to have to change their entire lives. And then some of these states, you know, as we talk about the right going nuts, some of these states want to give the family of the rapist, you know, the right to visitation and the right to, you know, all you know, to, you know, some sort of parental rights for the person who committed a sexual assault. Those are the kinds of things that I'm like, this is insane.
Yeah. I think what I would say to that is like, there's barbarity on both sides of this, right? There's people who definitely are refusing to put an upper limit. There's people who are, that is barbaric. What you just, you know, a lot of the stuff happening on the right is barbaric as well. I would say though, like what I think is probably going to happen if they overturn Roe v. Wade is a whole bunch of states are going to enact extremely restrictive abortion laws at the state level. And then their voters are going to vote in less crazy people to overturn those because that's how democracy works. And I'm not sure that as, you know, I don't see why that's necessarily inherently a bad thing or anti-democratic.
To all of our listeners with an IRA, a 401k, or other retirement savings, have you seen the headlines today? Our federal debt has now reached over $30 trillion. What the federal government is not saying is that the Fed is running out of ways to fight our growing debt bomb. Inflation and tax hikes may be their only way out. We all dodged a bullet when Senator Joe Manchin announced that he wouldn't support the Democrats' crazy Build Back Better plan. But the truth is, the Democrats may not give up so easily. That is not good news for hardworking American taxpayers. Whatever the Democrats do in 2022 may mean even more and higher inflation. The more the dollar comes under attack, the more physical gold and silver could protect your money. So if you have over $50,000 or more in your retirement savings, your money could be at risk. Learn how you can protect your life savings with physical gold and silver. Call 855-948-1605 to receive your wealth protection kit. That's right, call 855-948-1605, and Goldco may give you $10,000 or more in free silver when you open a qualified account. That's why Goldco is the only company we recommend for gold and silver. Goldco is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, a 5-time Inc. winner, and has countless 5-star reviews. So, what are you waiting for? Call 855-948-1605. That's 855-948-1605. Call Goldco and get started today.
One of the issues here with this whole discussion that the left has to own is the fact that they've been out-organized for 40 years on this issue. Mm-hmm. And yes, 27 states, or 27 or 23, some reason I have both numbers in my head, but 20 plus states say that they are going to consider overturning, and making abortion illegal completely. The question is abortion a big enough issue that people are going to go and vote out their state houses and their state legislatures over that? Or are women who have been raped and who are victims of incest and some, 14-year-old kid who gets sexually assaulted, are they going to bear the brunt of these kinds of political issues?
Jason, I'm not so sure that, your view on the kind of like the conservative rights view of those cases is as extreme as you. I've been to a lot of these pro-life marches in DC. I've been to protests across the political spectrum. And I think what Batya is saying is actually a lot more what I see on the ground, which is people are willing to have that dialogue about those cases. They have compassion for those situations. And it's something that they are willing to wrestle with when you actually, when the rubber meets the road and you actually give them the example, give them a situation that you lay out. I mean, I've had these conversations, both the Women's March and the pro-life marches. And I will say something that I've noticed is certainly that the pro-life marches are a lot more open to that conversation than the pro-choice marches. The so-called Women's March, or the pussy hats. I guess I can say it. Pussy hats. Yeah. That's what they call them, right? That's the politically correct term.
I'd say the pink hats. I just want to keep YouTube happy.
Yeah, I just want to take it full circle though on what Batya's initial question was, which is don't you think that the core of America, kind of between this moderate left and right, are a lot more on board with a collective idea? I think that every single contentious issue that we've seen come up since the Trump era, and I'm not saying that I think Trump is more of a symptom than he is the cause of all this, although certainly is not doing anything to put out the flames. But I've been on the ground, covering all of this unrest on the MAGA side and on the BLM side and the abortion stuff, all these causes that people care a lot about. The same thing is happening with the abortion debate that happened with the what should have been a police reform movement, but became all cops are bastards and defund the police. And so ultimately, it's when you're talking about incremental progress and you look at where we've come since the Stonewall riots and since the civil rights movement of the 1960s and where we are today, I mean, we are making progress. This democracy is moving forward. And I think that with the abortion thing, it's the Roe v. Wade was this top that was put on it for 50 years and it's been simmering. And now that it's finally taken off and it's now up to potentially, obviously it's just a draft, potentially up to states, people really have to start having those hard conversations about where they fall on those difficult questions, as Jason's. But I just think that we're just entering that phase of people actually really wait, now that this is a reality, what do I really think?
Yeah.
But it is a cosplay element that I think causes the extremes. And the people on the ground are way more extreme than the average person sitting at home on Twitter, But guess who's driving the conversation? It's the
Right,
people who are on the
right.
ground, and then Rachel Maddow
Right.
and Tucker
And
going
that's the
back.
thing is like, so if this had been happening on the left and Mississippi had brought out the 15-week bill, right? If this was a conversation that was happening on the left, all of the lefties who wanted it to be illegal after 6 weeks would have gone after the Mississippi lefties and been like, you're not really left. What is this 15 weeks nonsense, right? Because they eat their own. Whereas on the right, they're like, all right, everybody's doing their part. Everybody's, unifying together. Like there's a real lesson for our side in that,
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'll tell you this, like, what is it? Media Matters says that I'm some sort of like fake lefty that's going into the right wing places because I want to make boatloads of money. Now I do have one question that kind of changes changes the way we're talking about these things. And that is, like, you made an argument against universal pre-K, saying that it supports the two-income trap. So I kind of wanted to see, or talk a little bit about that, because obviously there are lots of us on the left who particularly, getting into some of these discussions about race and education and all of that. And I, anecdotally, I've seen what happens when some kids have pre-K and other kids come into a kindergarten class and it's their first time inside a classroom, social, emotional issues and not being prepared to be in that kind of environment, and it slows everything down. And then kids get frustrated with school. So I just kind of want to, kind of hear your side of that. If I've
totally. Yeah. No, that's a really, really good point, a strong point. My problem with universal pre-K is that the vast majority of women who are in the workforce are not working because they're like us, like people who are deeply connected to our careers and get a lot of meaning out of them. Most of them are middle and working class people who work at jobs that they don't actually like, and they would much rather be home raising their children. That's just, statistically, right? We're in the top 10%. We're careerists. We're like meritocratic elites who are overeducated, blah, 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 right? So we're in this very small minority, right? Who are very addicted to our jobs and very into them and get a lot of self-esteem and meaning from them. Most people do not. Most people working is a way to feed their family, a way to sustain the lifestyle so that they can do things on the weekends when they're not working and take vacations, right? And for those people, like most of those women, like they would much rather be home raising their children than working at Walmart or working at Amazon. So my question is, like, why are we taking billions of dollars of taxpayers' money, and instead of saying to women, hey, actually, we're going to pay you to watch your own kids at home, we're saying we're going to give them so that you can send them away and keep working at your dead-end job. We're going to take your taxpayer dollars from your Walmart salary, right? And make sure that every kid gets free pre-K, instead of, like, there's many ways to handle that actually gets at the bigger problem. The thing you just said about there being that gap between kids of different races and different economic backgrounds, that's a problem. But the solution we've come up with, universal pre-K, is accepting that problem has to be there, as opposed to saying, like, why are kids expected to be so advanced already at the pre-K level? That's part of that meritocratic crap where everything is increasingly specialized. Kids are on the rat race earlier and earlier and earlier because the funnel that gets you into the middle class has become so narrow and the working class is so downwardly mobile. So to me, that just looks like compounding a problem rather than addressing the real problem, which is that we've made it impossible for blue collar workers to achieve the American dream.
No, there are parts of what you said that I kind of see. The only thing is, when you're talking about, first of all, you have to give, I think, the left and the current administration credit, because they are paying people through a child tax credit.
Yes. A lot, all the credit. That's great. That's really important.
And again, they don't get credit because they're bad at messaging. and
they don't get credit because they've done a fantastic job.
I give.
They're just bad at messaging.
Credit.
No, they are. They are bad at messaging. That's a fact.
That's the only problem, though.
There are other problems. I mean, we could talk about, of course, inflation is a problem, but we also understand that China is shutting down ports and cities like to this very day.
I wish we had like a really strong leader who could, stick it to China for doing that.
And the whole country, I mean, the whole world, Japan, the EU, everybody is experiencing record inflation, literally. But again, you can't say that because you're like, oh, you're making excuses. It's like, no, this is like a global issue. But anyway, now here's my take on it. And I hear what you're saying, and I acknowledge what you're saying as well. But the economic benefits of pre-K for children. So there's a study by Heckman and colleagues that found that disadvantaged children who went to pre-K were less likely to get arrested, go on welfare, or be unemployed as adults, all of which costs society, costs all of us, whether you're a working class person or a middle class person. There's also, an estimated, there was a study in Boston, and, Mayor Menino, who, my wife is from Boston, from Roxbury, and, they did a study with about, I think, 4,000 kids, putting them, 4,000 4-year-olds and putting them into pre-K, as opposed to, citywide. And what they found was there was an estimated 10% return on every dollar invested in the Boston study. So while I agree with you that we do need to, I would say, expand the child tax credit, and also I think that there needs to be some sort of clamp down, since, Richie is talking about this administration. I think there needs to be a clamp down on corporate price gouging, which is happening, whether people want to acknowledge or not. They're having record levels of profits, 25% every year since this pandemic. And we are paying for that, by the way. The Targets, the TJ Maxx's, the Kroger's,
you want to know what they're going to do, though?
Record levels. So I don't know how to clamp down on that without, turning things into a socialist place that I want it to be. Go ahead.
There's no political will from the Biden administration because the left has become the party of the corporatists and big tech.
Yeah, no, I mean, that might be it. I think both sides are parties of corporatists and big tech. And, when you've given people these huge tax credits, not tax credits, I'm sorry, tax breaks that the right gave them over the last, the previous administration, they're banking up, and that's how, you're able to buy Twitter just yourself. So I also wanted to ask you, with that Twitter part of it, what do you think about Elon Musk and him buying Twitter?
So I have a sort of like, nobody likes my take on this. Every time I tweet about it, people get really mad at me, but I think it's terrible. I think Elon Musk is a China stooge, and I think that China is the biggest threat to American democracy. And so I don't have TikTok on my phone because I don't want the Chinese Communist Party monitoring everything I do. I think they're the biggest threat to America. And I think if Elon Musk that guy is on his knees, he's never said no to the Chinese Communist Party ever. He built a showroom in Xinjiang, which is where they are committing a genocide against Uyghur Muslims. He built a showroom there, not because he's going to sell any Teslas in Xinjiang. He built a showroom there to show his compliance with a genocidal regime. So to me, if he buys Twitter, I will essentially consider it like TikTok. It will be under the thumb of the Chinese Communist Party. And I don't see, it's so crazy to me to see right-wingers celebrating this. I'm like, you guys are supposed to be the ones who understand the threat from China. And they're like, oh, our new corporate overlord supports our free speech. No, he doesn't.
Right.
He really doesn't.
He's a globalist too. He's a globalist. He wants to like upload our consciousness onto the cloud. And it's like, if you're like a God-fearing conservative Christian, like, how can you be on board with that?
What are you doing? Yeah.
And he names his kid like numbers, and then he just like goes and like flies off. He doesn't even have a house. Like, he's a bum.
He doesn't even have his house. It's so true. The thing is, I totally get, I'm on the left, but I can see how disgusting Twitter is to conservatives, like how censored they are. I'll just tell you guys, the only time I've ever had a tweet censored, we had a debate at Newsweek, and this was the name of the debate. It was, is climate change an emergency? Meaning both sides of the debate accepted that climate change was real, but one side was saying it's not an emergency. they censored that tweet. Like,
not allowed to say that.
It's like, you can't, it's horrible how they treat conservatives. I totally get that. And I think it makes us all stupider. Like, the reason the left is so dumb is because they spend all their time on Twitter and there's no smart conservatives allowed to like have their, not none, but like they censor a lot of conservatives. But at the same time, I mean, Elon Musk is not your savior. Like, that guy's bad news.
Batya, I do want to ask you, like, on the topic of, you know, being on Twitter, censorship. So I worked at Al Jazeera, then NBC News. Then I worked for Mark Levin, and now I work at The Caller. So I've kind of been across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed kind of in the, I mean, Al Jazeera was a small office. It was like just the Washington satellite office. That wasn't the case there necessarily. But at NBC, one thing I noticed was kind of a corporate hierarchy that created a intellectual orthodoxy within the newsroom, and within the company, and within the coverage. And NBC Nightly News, they can choose 6 stories every night. And I think to a huge extent, you know, that orthodoxy of, like, we can call it left-leaning, you know, left-leaning elites, because like these guys are based in New York and DC. They, I think, wanted to view things in terms of race, like you were saying. They had certain things that you weren't allowed to talk about. I mean, this is before Trump, so I think it's probably gotten even worse. But I want to ask you, like, I felt uncomfortable voicing my actual opinion in that newsroom, whereas in the Caller newsroom, I mean, I say the craziest lefty stuff. I say the craziest, you know, we just go all over. I mean, we talk about everything, and it's very open. So I was wondering, like, I know you still work at Newsweek, so obviously, like, I'm not asking you to like spill the beans, but I'm asking your experience working in media. Do you think that that's a component of the left, especially like nowadays?
So Newsweek now is considered a center-right publication because we host both the left and the right. Like that, what I'm trying to say is, like, we are nonpartisan. We have all sides. My boss is a Trump guy. We have 2 other guys. One's a lefty, one's a righty. We're considered center-right because we have both sides. That has now become like a right-wing proposition, even though we're not. We're central. We're both sides. We're anti-cancel culture, and I think that is really sad. And that happened. I was at my last job. I saw that happening, like, throughout the 3 years that I was there, to where, like, in the beginning it was like, you know, I was getting it from both the left and the right, like, how dare you run this piece or that piece? And by the end, it was like the right was saying, oh, this piece is so gross, but I could see why she has to run it, because, you know, we have to hear from all sides. And the left was like, to the gulag, you know, like, so it was like, that has happened very recently. And I don't know, Jason, what do you make of that? Do you see that? Do you notice that? Do you worry about it?
Yeah,
he's canceled by the left more than we are.
I know, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I definitely see that. And I definitely, you know, I still go to Newsweek and look at a lot of your pieces. I'm a fan of Batya, you know, but I also read other people's pieces there at Newsweek. So I always thought of you guys as down the center. The only thing that I disagreed with is the idea that Twitter is this kind of, you know, left-wing haven or left-wing space, when it really, I think the right dominates Twitter. And there's actually a study that backs that up, that says that Twitter's algorithm leans to the right.
Really?
Yeah. I can see if I can find it.
Let me go ahead and give you my theory.
I overstated that. Quick. You're right. That's
let me give you my theory on that.
I overstated that. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this. I think that right now in the public discourse, people who tend to associate themselves with the right in this current environment have a tendency to speak much more honestly and much more frankly than people who are trying their best to embody whatever that shifting goalpost of this leftward swing that's happening right now culturally, which I think the reason for those engagements being higher on the conservative side is because the left.
Sorry, it's
because the left is talking.
Jason's
like
got receipts. Yeah, go ahead.
Twitter's
Sorry.
algorithm. What does it say?
Twitter's algorithm favors right-leaning politics, research finds. It's from BBC. If you I can find other, it's all the same study, but
I
yes,
think
it's
what
from the
Richie's saying is
BBC.
interesting.
Of course, I believe that now.
Richie, you're saying that right-wing people have to be more careful about how they phrase things and how they.
No, I'm saying that right-wing people have to be less careful about how they phrase things than left-wing people in the public discourse right now. I think that left-wing people are afraid of committing the crime of wrong thinking. Whereas people who identify as conservatives have already committed that crime based on their political identification in the first place. And so, Jason, I'm just saying, I think like that's more a byproduct of the right being the reactionary force that's kind of saying the more extreme stuff, saying the things that like, stoke the fire more, which is what Twitter's all about. Do you see what I'm saying? Kind of, rather than just like upholding the kind of like left-leaning, like, don't you think we do have an intellectual orthodoxy in our amongst our elite intellectual circles that leans left? You acknowledge that? For sure.
I think that, and there are certain, I think the pandemic really, in terms of like censoring right-wing information, or some people call it disinformation, whatever side you want to call it. I think the pandemic really, exacerbated that, because there were discussions about, I'm not going to say the name of the drug because I don't want this to get pulled off of YouTube, but there were discussions about that. Turned out to be, an ineffective drug. And I think that there was a way to actually say scientifically.
Are you talking about the thing that rhymes with Schmiharachi chloroschmin? Or is that the one you're talking about?
Well, that was one ineffective drug.
Oh, you're talking about Schmezabir.
Well,
which one are you talking about?
I was talking about
Ivermectin.
Yes, there you go. But I think all of those kind of fit into it. And I understand there was this public health fear that people were going to go and, I don't know, start, we saw it, as a matter of fact, people, would have family members dying in the hospital.
Yeah.
Dude, but what's the
give
fear
me
of taking that drug? That drug has been on the market for 40 years. But that drug literally has like almost no side effects. You can argue that it's not effective for treating it, and so it's a bad thing. But like the idea that like Joe Rogan gets attacked by the entire corporate media establishment for saying that he got a illness and he treated it his own way.
Here's the thing about the right, though, Richie.
Here's the thing. They said it's horse dewormer. It's not. It's literally been approved by the FDA.
No, I hear that. I hear that, and I agree.
It's like one of the safest drugs out there.
No, we agree. Here's the thing, though. Joe Rogan benefited financially from that. All the right who lives grievance culture, lives this idea of everyone's against me. I benefit from that. The only person who doesn't benefit from everyone being against them is me. Okay.
Yes. Jason is
I am the one guy who has not benefited at all from everybody hating them. But again, that's because one side hates you and the other side loves you more. Because of that.
And you're not playing the game.
I'm somebody who everybody hates. So it's like, we're
gonna make a movie about you called The Man Without a Tribe. And he's
definitely. Like it's like everybody hates Chris, like everybody hates Jason, but that's okay, and I still enjoy having these conversations and enjoy having this discussion. Now, one last question, and then we're gonna give you the rest of your afternoon, and then I'm gonna start sending you stuff every week.
Yes, because I can tell you, Newsweek's audience is gonna love you.
Yeah. Oh. Now you definitely know. I'm gonna write something right now.
Yeah, don't take them away
love.
from us.
I need love. That's one thing I need in life. So Richie was saying that he was attacked in Israel, and there was recently a journalist. He also said that he worked for Al Jazeera. There was recently a journalist who was shot by the Israeli military.
Well, it's unclear who shot her. The Palestinian Authority will not release the bullet, which they pulled out during the autopsy. So the Israelis are asking for an investigation. They claim that she was shot by Palestinian terrorists. The Palestinian Authority said, we're going to investigate. And then when they got their hands on the bullet, they refused to release it. So to me, that suggests that was not the Israeli military, because if it was, that thing would be all over the place and everyone would know about it. So but it's you know, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but it is contested, and there's, you know, we're not going to find out who shot her.
Wow. I didn't realize that is that either.
But something horrific happened today, which is her coffin was pulled out of the car that it was in, and they were marching through the streets with it, and a bunch of Israeli police officers someone started throwing stones, and they started attacking the people literally holding her coffin, and they almost dropped the coffin. It's the most horrific thing I've seen in a long time. You know, the respect for the dead is one of the most sacred Jewish values.
Absolutely.
And to see the desecration of the dead by these police thugs is just horrifying. So this story is just, I mean, her death was horrific. It's tragic. And sorry, you were going to ask a question though, and I'm just
no. I kind of want to, you know, just kind of open it up and get your perspective.
Yeah.
You were born in Israel.
Yeah. Oh no, I was born here, but I went to high school in Israel, and the situation there is horrible. It's they're occupying the West Bank. So the Palestinians who live in the West Bank live essentially under Israeli military rule, but don't vote for the government that controls that army. That's a real human civil rights abuse. Palestinians living in Gaza are essentially living under blockade. Literally nobody there has any reason to live. And it's this very young population, and none of those kids have a future. Palestinians living in Israel with Israeli citizenship make up about 20% of Israel's population, and they have 98% of the same rights as Israeli Jews. It's not 100%. It should be 100%. Israel still has a long way to go on that front, but their plight is very different from Palestinians in Gaza, whose plight is very different from Palestinians in the West Bank. So, you know, Israel has 3 Palestinian problems essentially that make up this conflict.
I'd choose the West Bank. If I had to choose one, I'd choose the West Bank.
What do you mean? Oh, to solve?
If I had to, you know, I would not choose. The Gaza Strip is the last place on the planet Earth that I would choose to live. And I will say, I think this does come full circle here though, because
planet Earth is a big place. I think shout out to everybody in Gaza, but there are some places, you know, other than Gaza that, and I will say this, you know, I guess, you know, with this issue, it's a really difficult issue because I, you know, like I was saying earlier, I grew up around a lot of Jewish people. I have a lot of friends whose families are connected to Israel, former, you know, people who are descended from Holocaust survivors and all of that. But I will always reserve the right to criticize a nation state. Like
exactly.
there's no, like, that is
100%.
not this conflation that it is anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic to criticize a nation state. That would be like saying, you know, criticizing, you know, Nigeria is anti-Black.
The right is certainly guilty of that.
It can be anti-Black, but it's not automatically anti-Black.
100%.
You know what I mean?
100%.
There can be a criticism of Israel that is anti-Semitic. 100%. But and to be honest, I've honestly not gotten educated on this topic almost on purpose. You know what I mean? Like there's almost like an ignorance is bliss.
It's a can of worms.
It's
so much history. I will say, sorry, Jason, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. And last thing I'll say is that I think it also obscures a lot of other things that go around the world. You know what I mean?
But it is like it's a proxy for this kind of clash between, you know, the like, I will say that Israel aligns, you know, more with the West. They have historically, you know, since the Soviet Union was aligned with the Arab world, even though Stalin was the first one to recognize the Israeli state. But basically, you know, it's like kind of a proxy for this argument of like Western imperialism, of encroachment, of monopolizing of resources, of marginalization of populations. And so that's why I was saying, I think it comes all full circle, because what happened to me when I decided to study Arabic and go to Georgetown to study Arabic was like, I saw 9/11. My mom worked in Manhattan. She was on her way into work that day. And I saw what happened to my friend's parents. I saw what happened to my friend's brothers burning up in that building. And my answer to that was learn Arabic at the best place that I can learn Arabic, so I can be the best person I can to go kill terrorists. You know, that was my idea. I went over, I studied Arabic for an hour a day for 3 years, and I lived in Jordan for 6 months. And when I went over there, I went to Israel, I went to Lebanon, I went to Egypt, I went to Turkey. You know, I was traveling all around the region and the West Bank. And when you actually get on the ground there, you realize that like the platitudes that our media has been speaking in, it does such a disservice to actually solving any of the problems. And the way that our American media, our American military, the way that we operate in that region, it's all around dollars. And, you know, basically like the invasion of Iraq, I think about this all the time. CNN and MSNBC were just as for the Iraq war as Fox was. And it was because it was politically incorrect to say anything otherwise, right? Because you didn't support the troops if you didn't. And there were so few people on the left at the one moment that the press was the last linchpin before that invasion. So sorry, I'll just finish by saying that, like, the same thing has happened to me in media, which is coming to work in media. I'm like, you know, with Arabic, I was like, okay, I actually don't want to go kill terrorists because I don't want to empower like this crazy, stupid war machine that has nothing to do with the reality on the ground. Because I met the people in Lebanon who said they were Hezbollah, and I met the people in Israel who said they were IDF, and I had a human face on both of them. And so now in media covering this civil unrest, I'm like, it's so absurd the way that, you know, the right takes this one clip on Twitter and turns it into the face of BLM terrorists. And then you have it's even worse now with the 1-6 stuff on the left. It is insane the way that's been treated in our media and the way it's been, you know, played up to be worse than 9/11. That is like, it's so, I think, insidiously partisan, the way that our media establishment on both sides, you know, on a corporate level, not like us individuals having this conversation where we're all just talking what we really think. So I just think nobody wants to put a human face on the other side. That's what it is. That's what it comes down to, because it's easier to have a bad guy and you get more ratings, you get more advertising. And, you know, if you have a bad guy, then you can invade them. And that's nice because you can take their oil. Sorry, I'm done. I've been thinking about this for, you know, the whole show. So, but Batya, I'd be interested to hear what you say from kind of the more, you know, you went to high school in Israel, about like the way that that's treated in American media.
Well, I think that on the left right now, there's this very knee-jerk sort of anti-Israel position that does often veer into anti-Semitism. It's much beyond criticism of the Israeli government, and it's very woke in nature. It sort of casts Israel as the white oppressor against a Palestinian oppressed. They erase, you know, the fundamental reality of Palestinian terrorism. They erase all of the problems within Palestinian society. They erase the fact that Israel is constantly under threat from these people. It's terrible. But, you know, at the same time, there does seem to me to be very little demand of accountability from Israel for its occupation. I think, you know, funding the Iron Dome, for example, I'm a lefty and I feel like I don't understand why we give so much money to other governments. I think Israel's a very rich country. It could probably afford to fund its own military. And, you know, I think we fund it because it's a strategic asset, but that case is never asked to be made. Like, what are we getting out of this relationship? I think America does get a lot of, you know, out of having an ally, a strong ally in the Middle East. So to that extent, it probably is in our best interest, but there, you know, when I look at $40 billion being sent to Ukraine, it makes my blood boil. You know, when I look at baby formula being, you know, sent to illegal immigrants, and when American mothers can't find anything to feed their kids, that stuff makes my blood boil. So I definitely don't want to, I don't have a double standard when it comes to Israel. Like, I do think we should be asking, what are we getting in exchange for this money? And that case should have to be made every single time. And it seems to me, you know, that we've fallen into this pattern of just like say, oh no, this is the way that it is. And I'm not sure that it is. So
who number two is, Batya? In
Saudi Arabia, right?
It's Egypt. Yes.
Egypt,
actually, Saudi might have passed it, but yes, the point, I think that just played into exactly what we're talking about, which is it's this game of, you know, bad guy versus good guy. But in reality, there's only one group that's benefiting, and it's not the American middle class. It's certainly the American middle class.
I can tell you from my experience in the Middle East, Arab people are some of the kindest, most giving. They like, if they have a meal, they have a piece of bread, they're going to split it with you. Like that's been my experience. And even some of my friends who served overseas, some of my good friends, they'll tell you the exact same thing. So when it's like, we want to, this idea, we want to kill terrorists, these people are terrorists. I think, again, not only is it an oversimplification, it's Islamophobic. It's, I think you could say Middle Eastern people are Semitic people, so it's anti-Semitic. I would say that. And I also just, when it comes to, Israel, I think that there are fundamental things that most people agree with, even on the left. People agree that, Israel has been a nation that has existed since what, 1948 or something. So it's like
48, yeah.
It was made. It is true. I think it's fair to acknowledge that it was a deal with colonialism. It was a deal with the British and all that created Israel.
I mean,
and so this idea that it's tied to white power, I kind of get that argument, but still, and then there are people that say,
I mean, you have to erase a lot of history to arrive at that conclusion. There were Jews continuously in Israel since like biblical days. Like there was never a time when there were not Jews there. So to say that it's like a colonial project, I think is like,
but as the Jewish state, that's what I'm saying, not like, that there were Jews in the region.
Well, but the Soviet Union was the first country to acknowledge Israel as a state, actually, because what they wanted was a place where they had a problem with ethnic Jews, basically having their own identity beyond the Soviet identity. So they figured, okay, great, they can go to Israel. So Stalin was the first one. So it wasn't necessarily colonial because, I wouldn't put the Soviet Union necessarily like as the same brand of colonial. I think colonial, the word has a certain like Western, European derivation to it. But like,
and I mean, there are a lot of stories, I think, that, have come out of Israel that have, in terms of like their treatment of refugees, particularly people from Africa, that I think a lot of people are, wonder a little bit about the irony of it, of a place that was a refuge for people who were being marginalized in other places. And then you have refugees and they're like, get out of here. And sometimes there were these discussions. I don't know if you remember when there was the whole discussion about certain groups of people, particularly Ethiopian Jews being, forcibly sterilized.
That turned out to actually have been sort of fake news.
I think it was overstated. But my understanding was that it was not as systemic as it was.
I mean, listen, every country struggles with racism. There's no anti-Black racism is a real problem across the globe, and Israel struggles with it as well. I mean, that's not, I think, few people, Israelis themselves, they talk about this a lot, the treatment of Ethiopian Jews, the treatment of Sudanese refugees. These are problems that, Israel definitely has. Yes.
And again, like Israel has problems, and I feel, like I said, I feel like I have the right to criticize Israel, but not anymore. I don't criticize Israel any more than I criticize France or Spain or any other country that has, or Mexico. Lots of these countries have issues, particularly with anti-Blackness or with anti-Indigenous people. So I agree with that. And as a matter of fact, you want to talk about a country that has issues with refugees and immigrants and sterilizing them. How about the United States of America? You know what I mean? Like that just came out in Georgia, where they were, sterilizing women who were undocumented here in the United States. So I'm not saying Israel is this special evil power, and I think that's one of the mistakes that we make. But acknowledging that there needs to be reforms, I think is fair game, and it's not anti-Semitic to state that. Totally. But
that's not how the conversation's going down. I think that's what we can all agree on, is like, it's very much two different, conversations happening separately from each other.
And I mean, you guys are way, like I said, I think you guys, with all the space that I have, the mental and intellectual capacity I have not filled it up with Israel. And you know what I mean? Because I think partly on purpose because I think
Tel Aviv is a great party city. Tel Aviv.
No, I want to go to Israel. I want to visit.
Party city than Tel Aviv is Beirut.
But I just don't want. I just think that it obscures many of the other injustices around the world. You know what I mean? Just like the right won't talk about Israel, but they'll talk about the Uyghurs. The left won't talk about the Uyghurs, but they'll talk about Israel.
I think that's exactly.
We won't talk about things
well
that are
put. That is
going
so
on
well
exactly
put.
right.
in different places.
Collective outrage.
Yeah, I think that. How
That is so
about
well put.
we as the United States, number one, deal with what's going on in our own backyard, but also, you know, be willing. And then, again, this is one of the reasons, and this is an indictment of us, kind of, is that we've turned from news to punditry. And, you know, Batya, you're a real journalist. You know, I'm an academic, and you know,
I'm a pundit. I'm not a real journalist at all. I mean, I report, but I'm not. I mean, the real reporters, you know, it's like they put me to shame. So I totally hear what you're saying, and it's true. It's a problem, but you know, I think that if I would have less of a problem if the pundits were on the side of like the working class. You know, the problem is that they're all on the side of the elites. It's like the leftist pundits are on the side of the leftist elites, and the right wing pundits on the side of the right wing elites, and nobody's speaking for 90% of Americans. Like, that's the real problem.
Well, you definitely, I think, did a good job speaking for most Americans. And we are really appreciative of you coming on here.
Thank you so much for having me.
You know, it's funny.
Such a pleasure.
Whenever
Jason, should I tell the story of how I got slapped in Jerusalem?
Yeah, no, definitely. But let me just real quickly, I just want to say, every time I'm wrapping my hands in gauze and dipping them in glue and glass, getting ready to scrap, I have someone like Batya that comes on and charms the pants off of me. So shout out to Batya. Like, this was an incredible experience. And hopefully, I don't know, are you in DC? Well, I don't know if we want to give your location, but
no, I'm in Brooklyn. I'm in New York. Yeah.
You're in New York. Well, when I'm in New York, I'm going to hit you up.
Hit me up. Yeah. And I'm excited to run you in Newsweek. It's going to be great. And it was so great to meet you. Also, Richie.
Don't take Jason from us. Don't take Jason from us.
Thank you guys so much.
Offer me a sandwich and you got me. Because
seriously.
Daily Caller doesn't pay me anything.
We do not have any leverage here.
Yeah.
This is not good.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Batya.
Thank you so much, guys. See you
Everybody
soon.
like, subscribe. You know what we do here.
Go
Peace.
Cats. Let's go Cats, baby.
Get out of here.
Look.